You know, obviously the change in administration in the U.S. portends some changes globally, as you see in the papers, et cetera. So there's been a lot of concern about what it means for Africa with AGOA. Obviously is one area. The other one is there was an Electrify Africa Act, Power Africa, Feed Africa, et cetera, some of the Obama administration's programs. And I'm chairman of the President's Council on Doing Business in Africa. We had a 3-year mandate under President Obama, and then we reconstituted it back last summer. And so we are still there, and we will be having, and it's run under the Commerce Secretary of the Commerce Department, and we will be having a meeting with them shortly. So there is still a view that Africa is a good market, and a couple of reasons. One is, you know, it's partly security. You know, job creation, all that is important for continuing to improve the security situation in some countries. And then I think the other one is Africa is still basically an import market. So from at least this administration's view of pumping out exports, that's always a piece of good news for them. So I think overall, it may not get the attention, but I think from a standpoint of doing business in Africa for an American company, you know, we all should still be very focused and really pushing at it. So I think, you know, whatever the administration, as our CEO, Jeff Immelt, says, is, you know, this is his 3rd administration that he's been through. The first 100 days are always a lot of stuff. And you got to see what's going to come out of that, and really then you sort of react. And you can't react to all of the rhetoric that's going on right away.
I guess one of the great enduring legacies that have come out of you know, various previous presidents' engagement in Africa, and I think that probably goes all the way back to Bill Clinton, has been the fact that they've really brought American business in with them and kind of said, this is you know, a place to do business with and a place to do business in. And I guess, so set aside the White House for a moment, because you know, we will wait and see with great interest what comes out of that. But what is the sense that you get from talking to Jeff and other big CEOs about how they're seeing Africa right now?
Well, I think it depends on the business you're in. And you know, from our perspective, we view Africa as a market that is very, we're very optimistic about. We've invested quite a bit of money in people, resources. We're putting in facilities around the region. We just opened up believe it or not, we just opened up an oil and gas service facility in Ghana 3 weeks ago. So we're still building a facility in Calabar, Nigeria. I noticed you mentioned the pirates earlier, so yeah,
there we go.
I haven't met them yet. But I think, you know, so we're still very bullish. I think you go through these economic cycles, and you can't make short-term or long-term decisions based on short-term economic cycles. And you got to look at the underlying facts, and we all know the demographics, which I'm not going to repeat, of why Africa will be important economically, and it becomes more and more important economically every year. So for us, as an example, when I first got there, you know, 6 years ago, 85% of our business was our oil and gas business. And we were running at around $1 billion a year of orders revenues. We're now at around $4 billion, and oil and gas is 30%. So our power business, our healthcare business, aviation, locomotive business have all grown dramatically over the last 6 years. So we're seeing a broadening out of our footprint, as well as the ability of countries to continue to, you know, support our growth from that standpoint. So when American companies look, or, you know, there isn't the historic connection that a lot of the European countries have. You know, there's still not many American companies there. You know, all of the engineering companies we work with are pretty much European, South African, Chinese, Indian, for, you know, building out power plant projects, et cetera. Some of the project developers are U.S. based, but, you know, a lot of the traditional supply chain that we would do and we would see are still not invested there yet, not as much as should be. So that's one of the things that I do as a leader of this President's Council, is continue to drive people's ability to view Africa positively as a place to invest.
And if we try and wrap what you've just said into the broader theme of made in Africa, I mean, you're talking about Africa as a market with potential, as a market where you can sell stuff. Is it naive to be thinking that in the same way that you make things around the world, in Asia and elsewhere, and aircraft engines
Yep.
and this and that you will be making big and important things in Africa?
Yep, we do that. We do that now, actually, and we're in the process of increasing our footprint from that standpoint. So one of the more, I would say, one of the models that we try to highlight globally is what we do in South Africa with our locomotive business. So we assemble locomotives in Pretoria. The first order that we got was with Transnet, who was the port and logistics company out of South Africa, and we supply the engines and some electronics, which come from the U.S., so it provides U.S. jobs, and then we do which is about 40% of the value of the locomotive, and then 60% of the value is done in South Africa with local South African suppliers. So we have jobs in South Africa, and then more importantly, we're building out a supply chain base, which we hope then to take some of that supply chain and put it into our global supply chain for the locomotive business. So and now those locomotives, we're selling them or supplying them to the Transnet business, but those are the same locomotives that we have subsequently sold now into Mozambique, Namibia, a few other countries. So we're looking at that as our, if you will, our base that we can supply an African-made locomotive for Africa. So for us, that's the kind of model. We do the same thing in oil and gas with our Christmas trees for deep sea or for offshore oil exploration. And then we're looking at doing some potential things in Ethiopia and Kenya as well. So there's a number of different ways to do that, and I think it's, and again, if you have to help build out the ecosystem, skills building, supply chain, et cetera. And so I think one of the other unique things we're able to do in South Africa, working with the government, with IDC, the IDC there, is provide a financing capability, taking the engineering qualification and offtake for us for being a supplier. They can then go to this fund that has better financing and basically finance that with the offtake for us, which then hopefully they'll build their business bigger than just be a supply chain to us. So hopefully, we're hopefully being able to grow that as well. And we're looking at doing the similar thing in Nigeria around a Calabar facility that we're putting in for a power business.
So this is really interesting stuff, and I hear you in terms of building out those supply chains. What are the big obstacles that you see at the moment? Why is it that we're not seeing these?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because people always ask me, what are the issues? And I just had this discussion with some people this morning, and what are the big issues? And it's infrastructure, okay? And it's power, and it's logistics, and it's skills. Now, obviously, we're in three of the, well, actually in all of those businesses to a degree, but fundamentally, as taking a look at investing in Africa as a manufacturer, you need security of supply of power, you need security of logistics, having your products get to your customers when you say they're going to do that, and when your supply chain can supply you at the time. So you need that security, and you need skills, people that are able to do the work. So all three of those things have got to be addressed. So when I talk to governments and they say, well, we have, our labor rates are cheaper, et cetera, that all gets offset by these other infrastructure issues. So if you're putting in a power plant or a manufacturing plant of anything, whether it's agriculture or industrial use or whatever, and you have to put in a backup power source, that's an extra additional cost that you don't have to do in countries that have a stable, secure grid as far as security of supply. Or you can't get your goods to and from market. It takes, it's twice the cost and twice as long to ship a container from Mombasa to Kampala as it is from that same container from Guangzhou to Mombasa. Those kind of things can't continue. for people to invest because they want to get a good return from that standpoint. So I think, and then the skills piece is another piece that has got to continue to be addressed by a combination of private sector as well as governments.
And you've been trotting around the continent for about 6 years in this role. Gives you a reasonably long horizon on how things are changing. And I guess in between all of the noise and the signal and the ups and downs of the cycle, on these key constraints, are you seeing kind of real progress, or do you look back on 6 years and say? Oh
no, there's progress. I think the story of Africa rising and then now we're in a down cycle, et cetera. There's still continued progress all the way through. So if I look at just my travels around the 6 years that I've been in all the cities that I go to, there's still cranes that are building buildings, roads are getting built. It's happening. It's going to take time. And I think that's one of the things that, and again, it's got to be a concerted effort between government and private sector and a lot of those infrastructure things. So if just as an anecdote, I was in our plastics business back in the 90s, and we built a facility in China up from Hong Kong, up the river, and we put it on an island, Nansha Island, rather than in Guangzhou area, because the logistics were so bad, the mainland of China, that we just said we'll just ship by barge up and down the river. And then a 5-year plan came in, their Chinese 5-year plans. One was all about infrastructure. Roads got built, railroads got built, airports got built, and now the logistics ability is unparalleled. So those are the kind, and it was driven by a combination of the government driving that as well as the private sector being part of it. So I think that's some of the things that some of the African countries can do as well. And the private business is going to demand that, and so that it will eventually. I mean, just Nairobi, where I live, the highway, the traffic still is terrible, but we have, much wider roads to sit on than we did before, and it is getting better. So and a lot more infrastructure is getting built.
Maybe you can answer this question. Maybe someone in the audience can. But of all of the sort of worst of British inventions to have been adopted by Kenya and the rest of Africa, why is the traffic circle stuck?
The roundabout. It's awful. I agree.
Why is that one stuck of everything else? Again, let's drill down a little bit, because we're talking in quite broad terms about broad direction of travel. Can you give me some examples of countries or regions that are really getting it right, and then let's give the ones who are not a bit of a kicking?
Oh, I love all my children the same. Look, I think it's number one. I think you need a combination of two things. One is a plan, and there are a number of countries that have had 2020 Vision 2020, Vision 2030, whatever the years and outlook is, and within that are projects, et cetera. So one of the things tied in that we try to do with the governments is we try to do in some with countries is a company-to-country agreement. And we outline a few places that we can help the country, whether it's in power, it's in healthcare, logistics, et cetera. And then we put in together, here's stuff we can do, but to be able for us to do that, we need the government to also do certain things. So it may be power. Now, so we can put together plans to finance, do power generation, but we then need to have an off-taker. We need to get that transmitted, et cetera, which would be the government's things, accountability of what they should do. So those are the kind of things we try to do. So I think when you go into a country that has at least number one, a vision, and then within that vision is a set of projects and priorities, I think that's the important piece. I think too many times you get governments or politicians that have a laundry list of priorities that are all prioritized, so nothing's prioritized. And so as a result, nothing tends to get done. And I think that's some of the things. And then to follow it through with execution is a key, and then follow it up, because every new election that occurs in Africa, the first month we go in and visit the new administration, I got to get power on the grid in the next 4 year, 5 year, whatever the next election cycle is. And, you know, and it's all great and all that, and then we hit the process, and it takes, you know, forever. And then we're at the end of the next election cycle. Hey, remember that? We still got to get that on the grid before the election happens. So I think so it's a continued focus, which I think sometimes is lacking. But I think, you know, all countries are looking at things differently from that standpoint, and I think the ones with election cycles that really have that plan out has been a little bit more beneficial. But I think the key thing, though, is getting financing for a lot of these projects, which is always a bottleneck.
Yeah. And again, is the bottleneck, as you know, referring back to some of the earlier conversations, is the bottleneck in kind of packaging a bankable study and just kind of the paperwork around it, or is the bottleneck that actually the real money that's got to go in there just is not willing to take that risk?
Well, I think there's money to be invested into the project prep. I know we had that discussion a little earlier to get it to the bankability side. But then to get it to that bankability is where the hard part. That's where can you get it there? So if you spend, I don't know, anywhere from $10 to $20 million on putting the project together to get it to a bankable stage, then you've got to then make sure you can get that done. So then the question becomes, what makes a project bankable? And I think this is some of the areas that need to be addressed on a combination of private sector, DFIs, et cetera. So you've got if you take power as an example, so you've got to get a bankable project, you need, through the power value chain from fuel to consumer, you need an economic return, you know, an investable solution there. So if governments subsidize the tariffs or have lower tariffs than are investable, yeah, somehow there's got to be some kind of, you know, offset, maybe a sovereign guarantee or what, but most countries don't have that capacity anymore. So the banks now are looking for sovereign guarantees, et cetera, or you get a credit backing from, let's say, an African Development Bank, the World Bank, et cetera. Those are all kind of different things that can be done to get these projects done. But you can't, there's going to have to be an understanding of having that basic economics. And a lot of that ties into that whole value chain. Africa has the ability, it's got 9 terawatts of solar capacity. It's got 350 gigawatts of hydro capacity. I don't know what the gas capacity is because most of the gas is still in the ground. When you look at Mozambique's fields, even the one in Nigeria, that are, you know, we're burning, flaring off gas. I mean, it can fuel itself. So the question then becomes, so you get the fuel and the ability to wind is another big thing as well, obviously. Then you've got the generation is actually the easy piece. Then you got to get transmission and distribution. Transmission, private sector typically won't want to touch. And distribution's difficult because you got to get collection, et cetera. So if you look at losses through that whole value chain, most of the losses that occur are in the transmission area, and Africa's losses are running anywhere from 12 to 25% versus 7% globally in that area. And then the collection losses in that are even higher. So you've got some discos in Nigeria that are 90% uncollected, you know, tariffs or revenues. So that's not sustainable. So those kind of things have got to get fixed. So in doing so, a lot of it can be privatized, but you have to have a consistent policy around it. And so when, you know, and that's one of the things continually is how tariffs get lowered or raised. They get raised, and then the next administration comes in and lowers them, or vice versa. That's not good for getting people to invest.
So Joe, I'm going to put a question to you that is a kind of personal bugbear is the wrong word, but fascination of mine, and I almost am embarrassed to use the word because it gets overused. But you know, we talk about areas in which Africa can leapfrog, and we all know the old story about, you know, skipping past fixed line to mobile. When you talk about energy, you know, the sort of pay-as-you-go solar systems that are off-grid on people's homes have shown that actually people in Africa are willing to pay. You give them a service that works and the lights come on when you flick the switch, they'll pay for it. And that feels to me like a real leapfrog. And I just kind of wonder, if you look across your businesses, whether it's kind of power and healthcare and all of that, do you see big opportunities for the continent to really kind of step ahead?
Yeah, I think well, you've already had one, which is mobile money. You're going to hear that from Bob later on today. But I think the ICT infrastructure, let me back up. I think you have two things. One is accessibility and availability. And whether it's power, whether it's healthcare, whether it's logistics, it's the way to think about it. So in the power sector, you got 600 million people without power, whatever the number is, it's big. But the majority of those people are living in rural areas. And the thought process that you're going to run a grid line out there and power up villages is not going to happen. So you've got to come up with alternative solutions, which is home solar systems, which are a number of great ones that are done, mini grids, microgrids, mini wind. There's a lot of technologies that are being developed by entrepreneurs in a very innovative space to really drive that. So I think that's one way. So, and then availability in the power is mostly in the urban industrial areas, where, back to what I said earlier, you got to have security of supply, so people will invest. Now in healthcare, it's the same thing. So there's just no way that you're going to have doctors that are going to be, or trained professionals that are going to be able to be out across all of the areas in a lot of the countries. So how can you use the ICT infrastructure that's already put in place to really drive back caregiving, if you will, to professionals in the available area, typically urban areas where the doctors and nurses are, or professionals are, and then have that diagnosis work. So those are the kind of things that we're going to try to look at. We've got, we've run programs in Tanzania, Ghana, and Nigeria with handheld ultrasounds, training rural midwives to basically give a handheld ultrasound to pregnant women, and they can determine whether or not those women need to go to a birth center, their breech, there's issues where they couldn't do that before until all of a sudden the baby's being born, where you had obviously a lot of maternal and newborn deaths. So those are the kind of programs that you can use a lot of this ICT infrastructure, and then also getting the availability of whether you do X-ray scans and things back in through mobile technology to be read by others. And I think the other piece, quite frankly, it's going to sound kind of wacky, but is artificial intelligence. So you have the ability now, I just read an article where AI now has the ability to diagnose cancers and things better than humans. Yeah. And other diseases as well. But why not, and the debate is always in countries like here or the US, well, you have the doctors, you got the medical profession, et cetera, versus a robot or whatever. Well, places where you have no health care, any health care is better than none. So why can't we in Africa do it differently? And maybe that's the place that you really put it in place first to really help. And it's the same thing with power. People always talk about we had this debate about Kenya. The World Bank, well, Kenya really doesn't need as much power as the president wants to put on. Well, what's the cost of no power? And I can tell you, for the last, we've been in somewhat of a drought in Kenya, and my power's been out for 2 days every week. Yeah. So there's no power, there's no supply issue or demand issue. There is a supply issue, and I think, again, that thought process of what's the availability of having something versus nothing is a big potential that I think we're African leapfrog. Money, mobile money, all of this stuff that we've done here, and the innovation here in Africa is around fixing issues. Whenever you go to Silicon Valley, all the innovation is who's going to invent the next Angry Birds game, Yeah. Versus how do I get healthcare out to the masses, or how do I get a power thing or whatever. So I think that's, to me, is what's so exciting about Africa and innovation.
We've gone from locomotives in Pretoria to AI doing cancer. I think it's time to give you guys a turn. Who's got some questions? I'm happy to start on that side over there, if we could have a mic right on that side. If you raise your hand, there we go, thank you. Should we take him?
Sure, we can do it, yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Kadia Touyansane, and I'm based in Amsterdam, working in strategy development for ABN AMRO in private banking. My comments and questions are as follow. The theme of the conference today is Africa. However, I have not heard much about French-speaking countries. So I was wondering, based on in light of the global reach of GE, if you had identified differences or in terms of growth, dynamics, or constraint of the French zone compared to the rest of the continent.
Great. Okay, so let's take another question, but we'll come back to Francophone Africa. Or do you want to take this now while
No, go ahead.
Okay, let's go to the next one then. If we could have one in the middle here, please. Or have I got that?
Hi, I'm Delhi. I'm one of the executive MBA students currently. I wanted to ask, obviously GE's got a global reach, and I'm very passionate about obviously sort of building sort of obviously local talent and promoting opportunities within Africa itself. How do you ensure that as you deal with governments and organizations, you don't the locals don't suffer or the environment doesn't suffer? How do you ensure that the processes that you put in place, that it's, you limit the risk of it being abused by, governments or other business people?
Okay, and let's take one more. There was another one. There was another hand right here.
Hey, I'm Tom Malabi, an LBS alum. I have two questions, if I may. One is, as the head of GE Africa, how are you managing to balance your mandate, which is profit maximization, I'm guessing, with building the value chain and doing all the long-term strategy, because that's not exactly going to give you short-term profits. Second question is, I like what you said about the electrification of the rural areas, the renewables. How do you see the pricing structure working in the rural area, especially as in terms of affordability, given where renewables costs are right now?
Great, thank you.
All right, I'll take the last one and work back. The electrification, it's interesting you say that. We were meeting, one of the things that we did around, with the help of Power Africa guys from the US government, we convened a group in Kenya around, because that's pretty much the best, them and Tanzania and Rwanda as far as solar home systems and things, using the mobile money platform, et cetera. So, the interesting thing is they talked about, should we be regulating that? And in reality, how do you view the cost of power when you buy a system that may be $200 that you're paying over time, and it uses the sun as the fuel, and you've got an inverter and some panels, et cetera. It's really to me, it's a financial services play that provides lighting. Okay, so the cost of it is the cost of the technology plus whatever the financing costs are. And however much you use it or whatever, you can't really do the cost of power. Yeah. And it may be the same thing with microgrids. Mini grids maybe not so much, but if you do a mini grid where you can go into a village of some industries or towns and put together some generating capacity and run a small mini grid, does it? I mean, the cost of the power is what it costs. So do you want power or not? And I think, one of the things that's interesting in renewables is that Africa doesn't subsidize power generation in renewables or anything else. Everything we've done as far as our renewable portfolio has been, basic cost and whatever the market pays. Where in the U.S., it's still wind and all that's taxed, it's through tax credits, et cetera. But, those are the things that are differentiation. So that's one. Profit versus, you have to invest in where, if you don't, you can't sell into an area that has no economic growth. And the only way you get economic growth is to continue to invest in skills and capacity and stuff. So if you're a corporate citizen, you've got to go in and do that. And I think from our perspective, you know, our GE Foundation, over the last, you know, probably 8 years, we probably invested about $80 million across, mostly in health. We're doing a safe surgery initiative right now in Rwanda, in Ethiopia, and Tanzania. We've done nurse anesthetist training. We're helping hospitals build their own oxygen making capability. We've done a number of curriculum development in schools at the university level for mostly around STEM. We continue to invest in, we've even gone into secondary schools, the Africa Leadership Academy. So for us, it's a continued aspect. We just invested in Kenya, a healthcare training facility, which we hope to train 10,000 biomed techs in the next 3 years. So that's if we don't build out that infrastructure, then there's not going to be demand for all the stuff that whatever, you know, whether it's loans as a banker, or whether it's food, or whether it's, you need a strong economy growth. So it's really corporate responsibility. And I don't say it's CSR. I view it as a responsibility because you need to do it for your own growth, not because you're trying to placate a government or anything. So
Great.
the other question.
Francophone Africa.
Yeah, Francophone Africa. You know, someone said that earlier about. I don't know if maybe it was I was quickly in the power panel, but or the power one. But Francophone's very strong. We've opened an office there in Abidjan. I've been there, I don't know, 3 times in the last 4 months. We're very optimistic. One of the good things about Francophone Africa is you've got a currency that's convertible and bankable, which is helpful. No, I don't mean anything negative to any other countries. Just a place where you can invest. And you've got some governments, et cetera. We've done a lot of work in Côte d'Ivoire. We've got, I think, 90% of the installed base in power is GE powered. They've had a strong IPP, independent power producing regime for quite a while. So for us, it's very good. We're also looking now at Congo-Brazzaville, as well as Gabon and a few other countries to continue to invest in as well.
Great.
And Senegal. And then
try.
it was, okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Wasn't there another one, or did we get them both?
I think we got him.
Okay. All right.
I missed something. Let's take some more questions on this side, please. So there's a hand over there, and then a hand over there. So 1 and 2.
Is this on? Hi.
Oh.
Hi,
Oh,
my
sorry.
name is...
Number 1. There we go. Sorry.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, my name is Ariel. I run DumaWorks, a digital recruiting platform out of Nairobi, actually. And we do a lot of forums, and we did one in energy where we talked to people in HR about, you know, what big challenges are, and what they said was graduate entry trainees or getting technology talent. And I was curious at GE what you guys have been doing on your graduate trainee level to help get people upskilled, and if you have seen public sector engaging a bit more than maybe before to better equip polytechnics. Is there any improvement you've been seeing from the public sector, and what are you guys doing? Thank you.
Okay.
And there was a hand here. Someone got the mic. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name's Soy B. I'm a consultant at Schultz Healthcare. Just a general perspective on Africa. You alluded to resources, and we know there is a lot. What in your opinion is the key to unlocking Africa's? I mean, not to be. I guess Africa's greatness in the sense of what is a key factor, do you think? Because we talk about many things, but I'd just be interested to have your view on that.
Great.
The key factor, I missed.
Unlocking Africa's greatness. What is
okay.
What is the one?
Greatness.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Let me add the first one. Tech talent. It's absolutely one of the biggest issues. It's not just in Africa. You know, STEM training and stuff, and having the ability to attract people into those into those fields. And part of it's a combination of 2 things. One is you've got a tremendous growth in technology from a standpoint of how business is being conducted. So now, you know, you've had your traditional electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, et cetera, which is one thing, which is, you know, designing products and things. And then on top of that now, you've got a whole digital piece, which we're, as a company, obviously investing very heavily in. So if you go to countries in Africa, and they're all different, so, you know, you can go into, they just don't graduate enough engineers around these disciplines. And the issue, you know, we're always going to have to take engineers that come out of school and put them into, you know, kind of get them to what practicality is versus theoretical. So that's our job as private sector, is to take people that come out of schools and then train them into how we would train them to be productive for us. But I think from a government perspective, you know, again, the responsibility should be the kids that go through the education system come out educated and come out with basic set of skills, whatever it might be. So I think that's part of the discussion. So the question of whether it's, you know, state-funded universities and or private-funded universities, you know, that gets back to what I was just saying. We've invested in some private universities as well as some state-run universities in some countries to provide, again, curriculum development, sometime internships, whatever, to continue to get that. I think when you think about it, one of the things that we found, and this is young talent that comes through, is in the US and Europe, and all you business school people here, you know, you're all looking for internships this summer. You know, the African kids in colleges don't get internships. They don't have that opportunity. So, you know, when we look at hiring an out of the university grad and their knowledge of business and how to operate in a business and all that, it's very different than people that go in the US and they've been having internships since almost high school. You know, this shows my age, but, you know, I was doing road work and anything to do, you know, internship. Who would want to work in an office for the summer? You know, and now if you don't work in an office for the summer, you're never going to get a job. So it's totally flipped around. And so I think that's one of the things that we can do, is to provide those internships and that capability for students as they go through it. So I think it's a very important piece. And I think, again, it's a responsibility of companies. And then
The small question of how to make Africa great.
yeah, I think Africa's great now. You know, everyone, the press, no offense, you know, finding out the stories that are, again, I use this analogy today. I go, 6 years ago, driving around Nairobi, or sitting in traffic in Nairobi, you know, I didn't see, you know, this is a terrible example, but, you know, it is one. I never saw Porsches. I didn't see BMWs. I didn't see a lot of Range Rovers. I saw a lot of Toyotas, a lot of Chinese-made cars. Now, Porsches. So somewhere money's being made, there's growth happening, and, you know, there's a middle class that's occurring. There's a lot of real estate investment. There's a lot of malls being built, all consumers. Now, does that, and I think what happens with Africa is everyone says, well, the GDP per person is whatever, $2 or whatever a day, or whatever those, but that's taking a look at the total strata of, and now there's a lot of issues that have to be addressed where a large part of that population is, which can be addressed through a lot of different things. But I think there's a lot of growth. We're going through a short cycle. I think, you know, there's a lot of potential. I think you've seen, I think the other thing is the things that dominate the headlines economically are South Africa, Nigeria, Angola, and the oil. Not many people are talking about Kenya and Ivory Coast and Senegal and some of these other countries, that are Rwanda, that are growing. So it's, you know, and again, you have 54 countries, so it's all different. And
Well, you know what they say, as an American you'll get this, you know what they say about averages. If you,
Yeah.
in Dade County, Florida, you statistically are born Hispanic and die Jewish on average. So there we go. we're up against the clock, but I'm going to steal another minute from the organizers and again give you the hypothetical $1 million to put into making stuff in Africa. Since you come from a big corporation, we can make it 10 or 100 if that's what you need. But what is the most attractive?
Well, I think the biggest thing is building out skills. I think we need to, we've got a crowd of obviously people in the diaspora. I think most here in London or wherever. But we need to continue to build out skills locally. And those skills will be built with people that can do the jobs. And then those people that do jobs and get good incomes are going to push for changes in government that's going to make governments more transparent, which will make economies grow, et cetera. So it gets back to that question earlier. But I think that I would put it into building out a sustainable skills-building innovation structure that I think will help leapfrog, to your question earlier, some of the technical potential that's out in Africa.
Great. We've covered a huge range of ground here. If you would please join me in offering thank you to Jay.